Jerome Paul Sonko for that update. I will be keeping tabs with you later on. Returning to studio, still continuing on with the post-election analysis, being with Timothy Kalyegira. One of the things that I would have wanted to hear is the candidates who did not win the president we have not seen in the history of Ugandan politics, especially on that level. Have you ever seen it anywhere else, Timothy?
Well, as I've been saying so far, just let's forget even about the losing candidates. One could argue and say, well, they put in money, wasted months of campaigning, they're feeling bitter, they're still in shock maybe. I'm going back to what I've been saying from the beginning. This TV here is in the middle or is in Kampala Central. This is where, 2 days ago or yesterday it was declared that Kampala Central was won by the NRM. Where's the cheering? Just spontaneous cheerings. A few people might say, well, we can't gather as crowds in the streets because, there are these noob hooligans who might come and, cause chaos. But I'm talking about chaos. Now, in the meantime, in the last 20 minutes, we've been hearing cheering across the city. What's it about? There's a Manchester City. There's a Manchester derby going on. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Where the cheering is more the football, the natural human cheering. Where is the cheering for 71? Had it been one of these, like 51.3 victories, you can say, okay, it was balanced and they are economic. But 71, by any standards around the world, even in exams, anything after 70 is an A. 70 plus is A. Where is the euphoria? Where is the cheering?
Yeah.
Across, as I say, we have viewers all over the country. Let them just look around themselves. Stand outside your house, your building, your office, and tell us where are the happy...
Well, the buildings are closed, Timothy. The offices are closed. The shops are closed. Where do you expect to hear the ululations? Maybe the home...
So I'm just explaining that right now we're hearing loud ululations over English Premier League match. That's what I'm
That being said, Timothy, let's also, just get your thoughts on some of the reactions that we have had from NRM cadres, such as Thuggery, who serves as the chairperson for the NRM Electoral Commission. He made a very interesting statement, and I caught him saying Uganda's history has been pitted with more bullets than ballots, but under the NRM, that changes to more ballots than bullets.
Well, if I take his comment at face value, yes, if you look at it in headline terms, fine, but I'm saying you have had more bullets than ballots in the past, and now ballots than bullets, but you also can have sort of like ballots that are sort of meaningless in some way. You have these slanted general elections where, people who have been going through the airport, Entebbe International Airport, over the last 3-4 months, you see the posters of only one of the presidential candidates. This is the gateway to the country. No other candidates' posters are anywhere even near the airport. Just obvious things like that. The national broadcaster, openly as a reservation for the Sunday Monitor, without hesitation, without shame, every campaign by the president has been live on the national broadcaster UBC. Now, I could argue and say that fine, that's UBC, but 20, 30 years ago, that would have been important because we had only one broadcaster. Now we have multiple radio stations and all this. One broadcaster, but also we were under the movement system. Exactly. But now it's multi-party politics. Yes, but then the argument could be that, to me, the idea that the state broadcaster, the BBC of Uganda, so to speak, is airing the campaigns of only one of the 8 presidential candidates. It's not so much the viewership, but the symbol, the message of it. That in the past, there was this attempt by the state media, be it the New Vision or the UBCs, to have what looked like equal chance to the candidates, just for the appearance sake, at least. Now, even that appearance in 2026, 25 has gone away, and it's now this open, naked, clear picture. You've seen videos before the internet went off.
But we've also seen them give slight attention to the other presidential candidates.
As you say, slight attention. Yeah. So to me, it's not so much even what you call the time, but the idea, like I was saying, and I've written for tomorrow's Monitor, this fusion of ruling party with the state is a problem we haven't sorted out in Africa. So what Thuggery is...
How do we sort it out in Africa?
I guess the only answer I can give...
Let me revise my question. Which African country has sorted it out?
Well, we have seen countries like Kenya, where you have an election and it goes to the wire and you're not sure who's going to win or not. And An electoral commission can even annul a result. Kenya and Malawi call a fresh election. We have seen, well, we know South Africa to some degree. We know some of these Malawis, these unsung heroes, the Namibias, Zambias, where routinely people hand over power. So as long as you have these elections where every machinery of state is, because Uganda, the state, is the 256 country code. It's the www.co.ug. It is this republic, and the NRM, or like 40 years ago, the UPC, these were just sitting governments of the state. There should be a Ugandan state, the one that gives out IDs, passports, has the country code 256, the police, the army, that work neutral for everybody. So what we've seen now, as I said, the videos you've seen of soldiers, you saw them on social media, openly campaigning, with the names visible for the president, whatnot. That alone just shows you what this the FDC man has just been saying. At the very least, this wasn't a fair election. You can question free when you start from that point of view. When candidates go to places, when you see NRM campaign teams and activists openly violating these campaign guidelines, and then the opposition has clamped down and the NRM gets away with it, people see these things and they notice it. Even primary school children notice such things. So in other words, you can have volumes and you can have 7 consecutive elections, but under a system that's kind of fairly meaningless.
All right. So, Timothy, from what I'm gathering, you're saying is that now more than ever, it's become very difficult to separate the state from the country and the country from the state, or the government in power.
That's the biggest challenge. If you just think back, think through, you're a media person, walk through who appoints the governor of Bank of Uganda, who appoints the IGP, the army commander, who appoints the electoral commission. Everybody of note in Uganda, previously, like in the old colonial system in the 60s and even to some degree, parts of Amin and even of Boti too, you could have a system where like the civil service appointed permanent secretaries. The permanent secretary was the highest ranking civil servant. Ministers could be political appointees, but these were announced and appointed by commissions, the civil service. Now, even permanent secretaries are appointed by the president. So when everybody from every judge, every head of every government entity is appointed by the president, what do you expect? You expect them to go against the person who personally voted. So that crisis. So in other words, no matter how many elections we have under this, where it's ballots rather than bullets, but if you have this meaningless system, then it is just going through the motions. So I disagree with Tango Doi in his argument. It's nominal, but it doesn't make much sense.
Okay. Help me marry that with the broader credibility environment of elections, something that not only the FDC, who has said that they've disputed the outcome of the results, also the indicator of the agent for the National Unity Platform candidate not going forward to just even a simple gesture, picking up a certificate of participation. That is speaking volumes towards the broader credibility environment of our elections as a country.
Well, to be fair, the NUP itself came into this election, make it official. It was a protest vote. So I guess Bernard, that Katana's walk away is part of the protest. And I remember I was here 5 years ago analyzing these election results, and live on NTV, the NTV microphones put to Bernard that Katana, and he was like so bitter. Benjamin Katana walks away saying these elections are useless, and also if it's Benjamin Katana, the treasurer of NUP, that's typical him. And as I said, that was their protest vote. And once again, to my simple question, forget the bitter, the angry, and whatnot. Where are the celebrating crowds?
Where does the issue of the age limits and the term limits having been stripped of our country leave us?
It now leaves us in this territory that's more like ETC. If you have no more limits to the presidential term and limits to the age, you then essentially drift back into the 1960s, 1970s African country. One-party state, life presidency is what it really is becoming. I'm saying we're now starting to prepare for 2031.
The bid for 2031.
Exactly. So in other words, and then, if now the argument of the NRM could be, you saw the physical condition of General Moses Ali, and people in Ajumani say, no, he's still young and strong and he's going. In other words, the view will be, if Moses Ali can run for a parliamentary seat, surely. So in other words, 2031 on the ballot, if he's around, will be President Museveni. So now what it is an open-ended road in which it's just etc until, I guess, he gets into his 90s.
Let's make a comparison to the 8 terms of service in Cameroon for Paul Biya, and how, again, it sounds like it's the same scenarios that we saw when they announced Paul Biya as president-elect for Cameroon at the time, and the silence was quite clear on the streets. In fact, if anything, there were protests a few hours and days before the official announcement. And let's marry that with where we are standing as Uganda. Heading into that direction? If so, how do we avert it? Because you've made reference to drifting back to the 1960s and 70s, and those are gruesome pictures and times of our history that are dark and blooded. We wouldn't want to return there, yet here we are having quote-unquote a free and fair election, and yet you do have helicopters flying over, Lord knows for what purpose. You are having UPDF now in an election being the face of security, being the face of law and order over the primary mandated Uganda police. You do have scenarios. As of this morning, one of our very own was able to witness firsthand, or he had an account of himself being stopped by a UPDF truck that was not number plated, and the officers that came off the truck did not even have their name tags as stipulated by the laws and regulations. Now they were telling these people, get up, pick up the garbage on the streets. If not, you get beaten up. Are we not returning to the 1960s, but also just marrying it with the state of Cameroon now with a long-term serving president?
Well, you've just made the point. The NTV colleague who goes cars without number plates and officers without this. Obviously, the first thing now is they are very much aware that although this is drifting back into the authoritarian 60s and 70s, but we were also in this international internet and digital smartphone environment in which everywhere there's a camera watching you. So, of course, some of those security officers are mindful of the fact that, if your colleague had a camera and the internet was on, he'd have snapped that picture and then that officer would be identified. So a lot of these illegalities are gone around by cars without number plates. So what might happen could be a return to 1981-82, a phenomenon that is called Thuggery, when there were these insurgents in Luwero and Pigi called the UFM of Andrew Kaira, Yoweri Museveni, and then the armed security forces and the army will then start cracking down on suspected saboteurs. So you might see more of these stories we've been hearing for the last 3-4 years of what you call drones, people who you won't wait to start organizing for rallies. By the way, part of the reason, if viewers don't know this, for the arrest of Alan Sewanyana and Mohamed Segrinya after the last election was this sort of scenario. These two young men were, staunch, of course, Bobi Wine supporters, and they had been elected, but they were not satisfied with the election. They felt, yes, but how about the presidential election? We disagree with this. And there was this belief that they were going to sort of cause basically like a rise up, a 1 million man protest in the city, and that's the thing the state feared, and that's what got them arrested. But to make the arrest credible and keep them in jail without bail, up came this trumped-up card of they were behind the killings in Masaka. So we're going to see a lot more of these drones pick up people. It will be behind the scenes sometimes. You just see the neighborhood. Up comes the drone, picks up vocal people, the Eddie Mutwe source of people, and on will that go. That's where it's going to be. But of course, there's another angle we haven't explored. Please remember that even though now it seems to be all sweet and honey and the celebration, we know that we came out of a very divided and divisive and disputed NRM primary election. So in other words, that even though there's this appearance of now the NRM is fully in charge, it's back to its large landslide figures, but you haven't dealt with
both
that crisis.
Presidential and also parliamentary.
Yes, but you haven't dealt with the crisis within that, and that's what happened to Uganda in 1980. On the face of it, the UPC had won the election by landslide, and life seemed to be going on. But then In fact, even there were lots of these unopposed candidates from the UPC. 2 years later, a number of Busoga MPs from DP crossed over to the UPC. So once again, you see, we're even gaining all this. UPC can do no wrong. But you see, when there's fundamental injustice, unfairness, abuse of power, the ruling party itself will have its crisis. And there started the crisis in the army that led to the July 1985 coup. So it wasn't these angry and disgusted DP hooligans and losers who forgot. It came from within the UPC. So in other words, I could also give a projection over the next 5 years. Watch for more of those splits within the government itself to be the real opposition. Because like I said, when you have this one-sided thing, eventually power still must find contestation. So it will go away from the NUPs and the FDCs and PFFs to within the NRM. So you start hearing reports in the media, so on, so cliques of people fighting and whatnot, coming soon to a TV screen near you.
Well, from what you have shared with us, it makes me wonder, what are the elements of good governance and good democracy that we see weakening with a government overstaying in power?
I don't know if the overstaying in power or the longevity in power is in itself a problem. You can have a legitimate government like this in Japan, the Liberal Party has been powerful, whatever. It is more just the fact that if you're going to have a credible election, please remember that another angle I must put in before I continue to answer that, Uganda's politics, especially the parliamentary system now, has become, away from it being competitive, is also lucrative. The salaries MPs get, the allowances and whatnot. There is no sector in Uganda today with such large numbers of people earning so much. So that then is causing it to become a very high stakes thing. In other words, when you rig me out, and people have been saying, maintain peace because an election is just a contest and there are winners and losers. Yes, but the loser, when there's a rigged election, is not the same as losing a table tennis match. I sold my house or I, mortgaged my plot of land for the 100 million shillings for the campaigns. I should have been the winner and then you rigged me out. That level of bitterness is one which no amount of military crackdown can deal with. So in other words, you're going to have very, very deep tensions of people, some of these people who have been rigged out, who now must not only lose face and lose their honorable status, but also go into huge farm debts and, crisis in the family. You must deal with that kind of fraud. That's why, as I've written for the Sunday Monitor, if you're going to have a parliament so highly paid with such high stakes, you must make sure it's a free and fair election. People are cowards. Normally, those traders that are on Nkrumah Road are usually cowards. But when electricity went off for days and days, they just went rioting. You can't control a human being, and there's only a limit how much fear can work. So what my view is that the only way would be, I think it's too late now, is to just separate the state of Uganda from the government of Uganda and leave it neutral. Then that's okay. Without that, you're going to see more of this. In fact, you're going to see more of this sycophancy around the president. You might even hear someone proposing we'll make Museveni a field marshal, no longer a general. So they'll follow themselves praising him for attention. But you can't have 2 million presidential advisors. You must find things somewhere. And that's where the conflict will come from, inside the NRM.
Okay. All right. I want to find out also from you, in terms of the Electoral Commission's performance, it also must be assessed. Did it do right by its mandate, especially on trust, on credibility, as well as inclusion, and making sure that they deliver to the country a free and fair election. Now, free and fair does not necessarily mean that there will not be glitches, there won't be hiccups, there won't be irregularities, but in the presence of all those, how do you assess the Electoral Commission in the 2026 general elections?
Okay, first of all, the obvious thing that happened on the 15th. Biometric equipment worth about 51 billion shillings was bought and was told to us, fine, you see, no problem, just turn out, do all this, it will work perfect. This is like Canada or a Swiss election. People stood in the baking sun for 3.5 hours before most of those machines began working. Starting from that and nothing more, just the taxpayers' money in $25 million went to the system that did not deliver, and we went back into the manual voting. That alone means it performed below par, starting on the technical side. But let's go to other sides. Like I said earlier, we would have people openly campaigning, openly flouting the laws, the guidelines of campaigns. When it comes to the opposition, especially the Nook people, they get arrested, bundled up. It comes to the inner, nothing happens. All these videos and photos were constantly pulled out on the social media, and the Electoral Commission had of this and whatnot. So the obvious bias was just clear in all this. Just those two accounts alone mean, at the very least, it did not perform above 50. There was the appearance, he did mention it yesterday, to be fair to him, the EC chairman, when he was speaking to he said behind the scenes, I used to make phone calls to police and say, but why are these people being harassed? So I can say, morally, being fair to him and Simon Biabakama, he did what he could do, but as we have seen through these elections, there's only so much a presidential appointee in a system where the ruling party and the state are fused into one that he or she can do.
Okay. All right, let's now look to the opposition front runner to the 2026 general elections, NUP's Robert Kyagulanyi Sentamu, Bobi Wine, positioning himself with accountability. He positioned himself with leniency to political freedoms, framing himself as the next generational leader and sort of wanting to be, or positioning himself as the answer to the strained need for a change of guard at the top or the helm of the country, mobilizing people power before he formally then built the National Unity Platform, running in the 2021 general elections, where he still came up as runner-up. Ghana draw the margins of what are the indicators of that decline?
Once again, the question has to be, how can we tell that this was a free and fair election? As people all know, the election isn't the occasion, the ballot casting, it's the build-up to it. But even if you go to the casting of ballots, I'd asked one of my colleagues, a monitor reporter called Derek Wandera, to be here in the studio. It's a pity he just isn't here, because he'd have broken down in technical terms across the country what really went wrong. I was listening to radio stations from across the country, from Mbarara to Kayunga and Mbali and so on, and you'd hear these stories, including Candace, credible people talking about how they went to places and tried to gain access, and there are these places that are closed off, and you see military people and you're not allowed to go in there, and you start saying, but this is an election. I am a candidate, parliamentary candidate in Jinja East or Gabula North or something. Can't I just visit this place? There is so much of that there that makes you wonder what was going on. This is what I'm trying to say. Then there was this thing that happened when on election day, just around at Lueza, not very far from the EC. There comes a person out of the blue. He walks through the crowd, the security, and gets this, ballot box, and then just walks away with it. And people are just wondering, and this was captured live by various radio stations, who is this person who stopped? And very importantly, one of the radio stations asked, and take this box away. This doesn't sound like an ordinary person. And so many anomalies you'll hear in the various petitions, which then makes you wonder. So to answer your question, how do you even start to say it's a free and fair election if you can't even be sure about these things? Mm-hmm. Even this thing about the invalid votes, like a friend did mention to me this morning, how can we tell what's an invalid vote? You almost sometimes wonder, maybe, if you notice, Priscilla's ticked, I don't know,